Hello, welcome again to the Bible MBA Vlog series. In this series, I've been taking you through the Bible MBA framework for how a Christian businessman approaches decision making and the principles that sort of undergird how we think about our business. In the first session, I did an overview of the entire framework, which has 7 components. And then in the second session, I drilled down a bit and talked about purpose of business. And then in the last session, I discussed how to succeed with managing people. This session, I'm going to be talking about cultivating a great corporate culture. Let me start by sharing one of Peter Drucker's famous quotes. He said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Now, in that pithy quote, what he meant was that however fantastic the strategies that you design may be, if you don't have the right culture within the organization, strategy ultimately fails. Indeed, if you get the world's best strategy companies and they design the most fantastic strategy for you, if you don't have the right culture within the organization, then ultimately strategy fails. Now, growing up as a child, I did quite a bit of farming. And one of the things that you notice when you do farming is that if you plow a field and you leave it for a few days and you come back, you're going to find a lot of things growing on your field. Now, all of what you find growing will be weed. You're not going to find one crop. Essentially, if you want crop, you're going to have to deliberately and consciously grow them by yourselves. It's the same thing with culture. If you want the right culture to sort of develop within your organization, you have to be deliberate about cultivating that culture. Now, when we think about culture as believers within the context of business, it's important to know that we basically have 2 options. And I'd like for us to read in Romans chapter 12 to get some sort of biblical perspective for this. So in Romans chapter 12, particularly verse 2, it says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." So in essence, you've got 2 options, basically. You can be conformed to this world, or you can enter into the process of being transformed by renewing your mind. Now, only one of those tracks of possibilities will lead to you being able to do what is acceptable and pleasing to God. And it is getting into the process of having your mind transformed and renewed. So for us as believers, if we want to build the sort of culture in our organization that will be acceptable to God, we cannot be conformed to the world. And to be conformed to the world in this context means that you're literally just benchmarking all of your decisions with what is done in the environment. So if this corporation, this company deals with their staff this way, you're borrowing the same thing. If they pay them this much, you're trying not to go above what they're paying them, and all of those sort of things. What we ought to do is to work from first principles to say, what will God have us do in this scenario? And to then search scripture and listen in the place of prayer to hear what God has to say about the right thing to do in that situation. Now, culture is a big word, and within the context of an organization, it's a wide spectrum of things. But I'd like to leave you with 3 things that should be evident if you're succeeding in building great culture. The first one is that the organization must be ethical. Once in a while, we're witnesses to the big implosion that one-time big corporate becomes when the ethical underpinnings of the company is not sound. So in the early 2000s, we all were witnesses to the collapse of Enron. And then more recently, we all witnessed the collapse of Theranos. These were companies that potentially would have continued to do great things long term, but because they made ethical compromises, they ultimately failed. So one of the things that must be present if culture is going to be great is that we must be ethical. The second thing is our team and all the people who work for and with us must learn to go the extra mile. All of the progress that we've made as mankind has come largely as a result of people pushing the envelope, people going the extra mile. Doing just enough is ultimately never enough. If we're going to make a difference that God will be satisfied with, we're going to need to go the extra mile. So that's the second thing that is a feature of corporations or companies that have great culture. And then the third thing that I'm going to talk about is empathy, how we deal with people. Ultimately, as I've said in the previous sessions, businesses are about people, the people that work in the organization, the people that serve the organization as vendors, and the people that the organization serves as customers. How we deal with all of these people is extremely important for how our culture evolves within the organization. If you treat people like they're factors of production, they're not going to do more than that. You can't ask people to just be factors of production on one hand and expect them to go the extra mile on the other hand. They won't. And so, in wrapping this session up, I just like to leave you with the thoughts: against what are you benchmarking the decisions that you make on a daily basis in your business? Against what are you benchmarking the principles on which your organization runs and is driven? I hope you spend some time prayerfully thinking about that and making the decisions that not only renew your mind, but also transforms your life and your business. In closing, I'd like to remind you that this message goes further if you like and if you share. I'd also like you to subscribe to the channel so that when we upload the next session in the series, you will immediately be notified. Thank you for listening.